Hey, Aharon Rabinowitz here for Red Giant Software. In this quick tip, I'm going to show you how you can use Trapcode Particular and Magic Bullet looks, two of our most popular products, to create an old film look with some nice light leaks that you can also use as a transition to other footage or to simulate some bad filming artifacts or whatever. Here's some footage of my daughter taken on a pretty old and outdated camera, the iPhone 3GS. Now, I've not been able to convince the powers that be that I need an iPhone 4, but I am slowly wearing them down. Anyway, I want to give this footage ye old film look, and given that my daughter looks exactly like me at that age, by the time we're done, I can probably even pull off saying that this is old footage of me. So, let's get started. Now, every video of me that I've seen at this age, I was moving at 15 frames per second. I'm not sure if it was me, if I had some sort of congenital 15 frames per second issue, or if the world just moved at 15 frames per second or what, but let me just go into my composition settings here and change it to 15 frames per second. Now, you folks at home are not going to see any difference here because I am actually capturing the screen at 15 frames per second, but rest assured, we are dropping every other frame, which is giving me sort of that old school look. Anyway, that done, I'm going to split the footage here right at this point. So I'll just hit Control D to duplicate it, and I'll Alt and right bracket to trim the clip there, and then I'll slide this down to that marker point which I've set, and I'll Alt and left bracket to trim the start point. And so now we've got this transition period right here where it jumps in time. This could also be different footage. You could try a different clip altogether and do a transition between one and the other as if someone had stopped filming and then started filming in a different location. But in this case, I'm just going to be playing around with time a little bit because you see that a lot where someone just accidentally stops filming and then starts filming again, and there's a sort of a weird jump there. So just so you can see it, there we go. There's my daughter Noah swinging and jump. Her mother's kissing her, and there we go. Anyway, with that done, let's now add in some light leaks so that we can help save this transition so it doesn't look so weird. So let's choose Layer, New, Solid, and I'll choose a black solid. I'll make it the comp size, and I'll click OK. And I'm going to name this, I'm just going to enter, click on that, and Leaks Left. And we'll add in Trapcode Particular. So Effect, Trapcode Particular. And as you can see, we can see the layer below it. I want these particles to really burn into the film below it. So what I'll do is I'll set the transfer mode to add. And now you can see they're creating a nice burny effect, which is going to look even better once we play with some of the settings. So next thing to do is jump into the emitter settings. There are a lot of particles here. Let's bring it down to 65 particles per second, which reduces them a lot. And we'll also set the position of the emitter. Instead of the center of the screen, I'm just going to drag it over to here. You can alternatively use this position XY thing. In fact, why don't I just set this over to x equals 0, and so there it is on the edge of the screen. Now, what's happening is these particles are being emitted from one central point, and I'd like them to be emitted from a controlled area that I define. So we can set this to box, from emitter type from point to box, and what happens is the particles are being emitted from a specific area. Now, the size of this area is determined by this stuff right here, emitter size X, Y, and Z, which we'll come back to, but its size X is 50 pixels, Y is 50, and Z is 50, so it's sort of like a little cube in the space of 50 by 50 by 50. But again, we'll come right back to it after we just make a few more changes. Let's set the velocity down from 100, we'll set the velocity down to 1. So it's really, the particles are moving small. Now you can see that box a little bit more. That's looking pretty good. And we'll also now just jump over to our settings here for the size X, Y, and Z, and we'll set that to size X will be 1, so it's basically 1 pixel wide, and size Y for the height will be 480, and that's because the size of my video is 640 by 480. And that's just another weakness of the iPhone 3GS, whereas the iPhone 4 can film in HD. Also, I'm going to set the size Z down to 0 so that we're only emitting out of this one little pixel line area, and we've got our little white circles being generated. Okay, so we still got to make a bunch of changes. Let me twirl up the emitter options here and jump into my particle settings. And the particles are living too long, so why don't I set the particle life to 0.1. They will only live for 0.1 of a second, and at 15 frames per second, that is for 1.5 frames. And so to create some variation there, let me set the life random up to 40%. So some of these particles will live, another frame maybe, if at that, something like that. And I'm going to bring the size of these particles up a bunch. So I want to set this up to 60, maybe even a little bigger, 65. But they are way too present. I want to create some feathering so that they sort of fade off into the footage. So let me just jump up here to my sphere feather, and I'll set that up to 100. So now we've got a bit more feathering there, and that's looking good. It's looking okay. The size is all the same of the particles, so I'm just going to set the size random up to, let's say, 50%, maybe even 80%, something like that. Yeah, it looks good. And while this is all great, size is different. The opacity is all 100%, and I'd like to reduce that a bit. So why don't I keep the opacity to 100%, but I'll set the opacity randomness. Let's say I set the opacity randomness up to 100% as well, and that'll create some variation. Also, I'd like to mess around with the opacity over life so they sort of fade in and then disappear. So I'll use this bell curve right here, and just in my opacity over life, the bell curve there's no opacity at the beginning. Most of its life is spent opaque, and then it disappears. And it's pretty subtle, but there's definitely a difference. So if I do a RAM preview here, I can see that we're getting some variation in the look. Of course, the colors are not right. Light leaks tend to be orange and yellow and red. So let's jump into our settings here for color, and I'll say set the color to random from gradient. Obviously, these are not the colors I want, so let me just go into my color over life area, and I'll just get rid of a bunch of colors that I don't want to have. And so right now we've got from red to yellow, and yellow is definitely not a color I want because yellow is just so bright it'll start blowing out the footage. Let me just jump in there, double click on that, and set that to a deep orange. That's looking pretty good. And what happens is, because I'm using the add transfer mode, when it hits a light spot of the footage, that orange almost looks yellow. Furthermore, when the particles run over each other, I can use the blending mode, and let me just trawl down the rendering properties here, and I can set the transfer mode or blending mode here. I'll set that to add. So when the particles do run over each other, we get some very bright areas, and that's already looking pretty good. Let's take a look at that. Now, these light leaks are very hefty there. I don't want them there the entire time, and I don't want them there quite as strongly. Subtlety is a part of this process. So let's do a couple of things. First is, let's hit T to reveal the opacity, and I'm going to set the opacity down to 50%. And that's looking definitely better. But again, I don't want them there the entire time. What I think I would like to do is, at this transition point, I'd like them to be up for a little while before that. So not a long time, just a very short time. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 frames back. I'll hit the opacity stopwatch to add a keyframe. I will jump back 10 frames, and I'll add in another opacity keyframe with a value of 0. And I'll jump ahead 20 frames, and I'll set this back to, I'll check this off and give us another keyframe with a value of 50. And jump ahead 10 more frames, and we'll be back at 0. And so it goes 0, 50, 50, 0 with 10 frames in between each. Okay, so we've done most of the hard work for the light leaks. Let's just duplicate the layer, and I'll select Particular here, and let me rename this. Instead of leaks left, I'll call this leaks right. And again, with Particular selected, I'll grab hold of the emitter. I'll move it over to the right side. Now this would be all well and good, except for the problem where the light leaks look exactly the same on both sides because it's using the same random seed. So let's just change the randomness there a bit, and I'll just jump down in my emitter settings here, at the bottom of the emitter settings, there's something called random seed, and I'll just change it to any other number. I'll just make that 1 a 2. And now if I do a preview, so we get this, and the leaks come in right before the transition, and then there's only one more set of leaks to add, and that's the full screen full of very present and prominent leaks. So let's duplicate this again, Control D, Command D on a Mac, and let's make some changes to this. Okay, first is, let's set the particles per second up to 500. That's a lot of particles. And let's move it to the center of the screen. Actually, I think we're going to have a little more luck just to be, so 320 by 240 is where it should be at. And that does that. And let's set the emitter size X to 640 so that it covers the entire screen, right? And of course now there's not enough particles to fill the screen, so we need to just do a couple of things. Either we could raise the amount of particles, but I think I'd rather raise the size of the particles. So let me twirl up the emitter properties and get to the particle properties here, and I'll set the size up to 200. Let's go with that. Okay, that really fills up the screen pretty nicely. And what we'll do is, for opacity here, let me hit T to reveal opacity, and let me just delete these values there. I'll set the opacity to 100%, set a keyframe, and I'll move back just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'll set the opacity down to 0. And again, I'll just jump to those 5 frames after the 100% keyframe, and I'll set that down to 0 as well. And now if we do a RAM preview, lots of particles, taking its time thinking about it. There we go. So we've got our light leaks, and maybe this doesn't look perfect, but once we get to the next steps of adding Magic Bullet looks and something called misfire, it'll really sell itself. Now, before we go any further, the really obsessive compulsive part of me is making sure that I change this from leaks right to leaks center, just so that I have it there. And now that that's done, let's give this footage an old school look. So I will choose layer, new, and we'll choose adjustment layer, which is a layer that when you apply an effect to it, it affects every layer below itself. And then I'll choose effect, magic bullet, and looks. And nothing happens initially because Magic Bullet looks by default is set to no change to the footage. But let's jump in there quickly. And here I am in the looks builder. Let me just zoom out a tiny bit so I can see the whole bunch of footage. And if you haven't used Magic Bullet looks, it's a great tool. It's got a bunch of preset looks that you can apply to it. You can also create your own looks for your footage. Taking a look in here, let's just see what we've got. We've got so many different looks, right? I could start with the basic warm or basic warm max, and I could even change the warm cool effect to something a little more red, like you're seeing in old school video. But you know, it's not going to be. It doesn't really give me that feeling of nostalgia that I want. Now, it just so happens that Red Giant just came out with a new set of presets for looks called Nick Campbell's Vintage Film for Looks. Nick, you probably know his stuff. You've seen his great iPhone apps, Cross Process and Shake It Photo, and of course his website Grayscale Gorilla. But he converted those presets, those looks, from the iPhone to something that works with Magic Bullet looks, among many other things. A whole bunch of cool stuff in there. You know, we've got a purple, yellow tint, and super vintage. I'm actually going to go with one called Sunlit Bright, because what I really love about it is it's got these, you know, all the things that were almost black but not quite black turn red. So it's really got this old sort of worn out look to the footage, whereas the stuff that is really close to black stays black. So looking pretty good. And that's pretty much all I need right there. And with that done, you know, if I take a quick look now, if we just do a RAM preview, we can see that this is looking pretty sweet. But we're not quite there. One thing I want to point out is, because I've added the adjustment layer above everything else, the leaks are now being blended into the footage a little better because Magic Bullet looks is being applied to everything below it. So even the leaks are getting this sort of old school look applied to it. But we have a bit more to do to get this footage to really look old school. Now, the last thing we need to do here is to really add in a bunch of, stuff that makes the film look like it's old. If you have Magic Bullet Looks, you actually have a really fantastic tool set for doing this. You may not even be aware of it, but it comes with Magic Bullet Looks. It's called Magic Bullet Misfire. So I can choose Effect, Magic Bullet, Misfire, and you see there's a whole bunch of tools here. These are each the individual effects that are all a part of Misfire, or you can just add the overall Misfire effect, which is what I'm going to do. I'll just add that in, and I will start with applying fading, which fades out the look of the footage even more than the preset that we've added does. And I'll also apply some funk, which you can see here. And we'll also add in some splotches. And again, you could get into these things and make changes to the settings on the splotches. I'm going to leave that as is. And the splotches you can't really see. When it's in motion, you'll get a much better view of it. Also, we'll add in some flicker so that it gets brighter and darker between frames. And let's see, we'll also add in some scratches, some deep scratches here. I'm not a big fan of the green, so I'll twirl down the deep scratches property here, and I'll just set this from green to something that's almost white. And I'll click OK. And then finally, I'll add in something called Gate Weave, which, as you can see, it moves the footage over a little bit, and over time you'll see it's moving it over left and right. Basically, the sprockets in film over time, especially when they're older film that's been watched many times, the sprockets start to get bigger, which makes the film on the projector get a little bit looser, and so the film starts to move left or right. And so that's what we're simulating here. Anyway, with that done, let me do a RAM preview, and we could take a quick look at that. And that's looking pretty good. I'm fighting the urge to sing the song from the Wonder Years right now. There's only one other thing I'd probably change, and that is to change the order of the effects. I love the noise that Misfire creates and all the different stuff, but I'd like to have Magic Bullet Looks affecting that too, so that they're blended with the footage a little more. And as you can see, with Magic Bullet Looks applied past Misfire, so basically after Misfire is applied, Looks is applied, all of these effects tend to even come together a little better because the color palette's a little tighter. So let's just take a quick look again, do another RAM preview. Now that is looking pretty good to me. That looks pretty old school, and I'm really digging it. So that's pretty much how you do that old school film look. And I want to just mention a couple of things, which is, of course, Magic Bullet Looks is full of great tools, and you don't need to use any presets. You can always create your own looks or use one of the ones that come with it. But I'll tell you that these vintage film looks definitely save a ton of time and really hold up to the visual test of feeling old school. Also, Magic Bullet Misfire, I added these in and I just kind of checked off some of the boxes, but I really strongly suggest you go in and you make changes to it. You might want to make these dust and scratches a little bit less opaque to sort of pull it back a bit so it's a little more subtle. But overall, this is looking pretty good, and it didn't take too long to do that. Anyway, I hope that this helps you in your work. If you're interested in checking out Nick Campbell's Vintage Film for Looks or any of the other Red Giant products that we talked about, head over to redgiantsoftware.com. You can find Nick's looks over here by products, and then just click on Nick Campbell's Vintage Film for Looks, or you can check out all of the Guru preset packs by clicking on All Guru Presets. And here you'll get a list of every Guru preset pack we've got. And there's some for Trapcode, some for Magic Bullet Looks, and a whole bunch of other stuff too, so check that out. And if you're looking for free presets, hey, head over to redgiantpeople.com, which is our community site for sharing presets, where you can share your own or you can download other people's. There's plenty of free stuff there, and you just kind of head over here and you play videos for something you're interested in looking at. And if you like it and you think it's for you, just, hey, go for it, man. Go download it. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for watching. Once again, I'm Aharon Rabinowitz for Red Giant Software. See you next time.